Buckle up, Buttercup. We are going to be diving into every single thing that you need to do to launch a podcast, literally from ideation to when we hit publish, with a little bit of bonus stuff of what we can do to make sure every episode publishes as smoothly and simply as possible. Let's do this. Hi, my name is Desiree, and I'm here to help make social media easy for you. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, Desiree, what does podcasting have to do with social media? Look, I do a whole lot about content creation, how we can work smart, not hard. And I truly believe that podcasting is one of the easiest ways for you to create a massive amount of content in a short amount of time. It's going to pack so much punch, give so much impact. And I did a whole video about it that you can watch up in the cards right now, talking about how I think podcasting is the new blogging and how you should be doing that instead. So now, along the way of our video, if you are wanting to fast forward through anything or skip different parts, I have all the chapters down below so as not to waste your time or teach you something that maybe you don't already know. Okay, let's dive in. First things first, we need to pick our topic or name. Like, why are you doing this podcast? Like, what is the purpose of it? You need to really dive in deep into like, okay, what is it that I'm trying to do with this podcast? What are the goals that are attached to it? And who is it that I'm going to be very specifically talking to? And then you're gonna want to do the research and find what are the other podcasts that are out there that are kind of related to what you're doing, to see what they're doing, to see how popular it is, how trendy, oversaturated it is, all of this stuff. By knowing who you're talking to and why you're talking to these people, like what you're trying to accomplish from a business perspective, it's going to allow for you to really accomplish what you want with this podcast. This is very foundational. For this video, the example I'm going to be using is a podcast I produce. It's called The Funded YouTuber. The Funded YouTuber exists to essentially teach people how YouTubers make a full-time income. This doesn't mean that they have millions of subscribers and all that kind of stuff. This is like, okay, how do everyday normal people who are on YouTube make a living? And we talk to people from all different walks of life, comedians, physical product creators, educators, all of that and in between. And the objective, the purpose of this podcast is to help the company that sponsors the video, Gigastar, get credibility and established in the YouTuber and creator space. Because Gigastar helps YouTubers procure funding for their businesses, for their creator businesses, they want to establish themselves as experts and industry leaders. And the podcast allows them to do that because they're able to create something that talks directly to their target customer. Now, once we know like what we're going to talk about and who we're talking to them and like why we're talking to them, what are we going to call our podcast? That's when having a really short and simple podcast title is going to be very impactful. I encourage you to keep this like under 3 or 4 words. The more words you have, the less catchy it is and the less it's going to be appealing to people who want to check it out. It should be very easy to talk about and very obvious what it is that you do. I have a podcast to do called The Women of Video. It's about women who make video. The Funded YouTuber is about funding for YouTubers. So there's a lot of like kind of obvious things that you can tie into it. So to recap kind of like this baser thing that we need to do, you need to make sure that you know what your podcast is going to be about, who you're talking to, what the purpose of your podcast is, and what's the name going to be that's going to attract the right people to your podcast. Next, we're going to outline what is going to happen in our podcast. Now, I always encourage everybody to have at least 10 episodes planned out as best as possible. So what are you going to talk about in your first 10 episodes of your podcast? Are you going to answer commonly asked questions? Are you going to dive into topics specifically that you have? Like maybe you're in the HVAC business and you want to talk about like all the like 10 things everyone needs to know about their HVAC systems and how they take care of them and for their house. You're going to have all these examples and stuff, and every single point is going to be an episode. Maybe you're going to interview people like I do on the Funded YouTuber podcast. So I need to reach out to 10 people or more actually and see if I can get them to be on the podcast, to schedule them to be on to do the interview process. And then within all the outline of like figuring like, okay, what am I going to talk about? Who am I going to talk to? I need to have like my talking points out. Like, what are the things I'm going to say? So if I'm doing this as like a solo podcast where I'm teaching someone something, each topic needs to be a really good title. And then I need to have outlined out what it is I'm going to say. Now, I highly 100% believe that you should not script out your podcast. This is you having a conversation with somebody. A script is not a conversation. People expect a podcast to be a conversation, okay? You do not want to be having stuffy reading, because what happens when you're scripting and you're talking, oftentimes, unless you're trained, what's going to happen is you're going to start talking and it's going to get kind of slow and kind of monotone, and it's going to not translate well to your audience. We don't want that. Have a conversation. be fluid with what you're talking about. Outline out what you want to talk about and have those as talking points. Same with your interview. Like if you are interviewing someone, have a group of questions that you can always turn to ask the person that you're interviewing. And also while they're talking, like take notes and think of questions that would come up from the things that they're saying that you could ask them as well. By having those basic questions and having that outline, it's going to give you a really good structure of what's going to happen in each episode. And I also think it's important for you to know that your podcast can evolve. Like you can add in more questions or take away questions or figure out a better outline or structure for each episode as you go along and you get better at it. But by having that base outline, it's going to be really important. You want to launch your podcast with 5 episodes. Okay, minimum of 3, but at least 5 episodes. Then you would have 5 more in the hopper ready to go, so you have time to get ahead on it. It's also going to teach you if this is something that you can commit to. Can I commit to these 10 episodes? Can I commit beyond 10 episodes? Is this something I would like to do for more than 10 episodes? So it's going to allow for you to work through that in that kind of way. Now we need gear. Now there are some specific things that you want to have in place when you are doing recording. And the number one thing is you need a really good microphone. Now this is the Shure microphone. I also have a Rode microphone that I use for recording these as well as my Women in Video podcast. Having an external microphone is going to be really vital because you are creating an audio first experience. Even if you are planning to do a video podcast, which is what I do with the Funded YouTuber and the Women in Video podcast, where like I need to have lights and camera and all that stuff. My audio is the most important thing because podcasts have an expectation, a requirement of having good audio first. So really dive into like what is an affordable mic that you could get that's going to be really useful for your needs. You can definitely go to YouTube and just search like best mic for podcasting or cheapest mic for podcasting or whatever it is and find one that makes sense for you, that's easy for you to use, that allows for you to have the best outcome possible, which is good audio. Now, as a bonus, if you're planning to do a video podcast, which I highly, highly, highly recommend because you could repurpose that podcast into YouTube and you can also then repurpose your podcast into other video formats and things like that, which I've talked about again in my podcasting is better than blogging video that I totally talked about. But you want to consider having a really good camera. You want to have lights so that you can like have a good setup for recording your content. I have a very simple camera. Like the camera I use to record these YouTube videos is literally a webcam. Now it's a 4K webcam that I got from Opal, but a really great one. I'll put the link down in the description that you can check it out. And I have just simple LED lights right here, 2 of them, bam, bam, and it just like makes it look nice. Just get a light, get a camera, and get a mic and make it work as best as possible. Just always remember, quiet space and clean your lens. Now, as a bonus to like the gear situation, consider your backdrop. Now, your backdrop, in my opinion, in my education, in my experience, is an extension of your brand. As you can see what's happening behind me, I have my book, I have the brand that I work with all the time, which is StreamYard, who is, by the way, the sponsor of this video. I have this fun cube thing that's happening here that is from a client I've worked with in the past. This is a fun piece of tech gear that I love that is just super silly. I also have stuff that's over here as well. I have a simple white background, which is a big part of my branding. I have this little accent light that does some extra stuff to make the background look more dimensional. A background is an extension of you as a person. I used to have like a shelf of like all my toys and stuff, and it was really distracting and very cluttered and very hard to see me through all of that was happening. And the more I added to it, the harder it became to see. So by keeping it this simple background, it allows for you to easily know me, but also like you're in the right place. It's not this like boring statikless thing. It's also not distracting with like too much happening, clutter, open doors, people walking by, cars going on. Like we want to keep our background simple and an extension of what it is that we are doing. So now we finally get to record our content. Now I'm going to encourage you to do all of your content recording in StreamYard. StreamYard is my go-to video recording software that I've been using for over 5 years. I use it for literally everything. I love it because I can not only live stream, but I can do all of my podcast recording inside the tool. I can have a really great background that I have created for the Women in Video podcast, and I can put it behind me, and then the 2 people that we're interviewing were side by side. I also can set up my podcast really effectively. I have my bottom thirds. I can add in additional overlays. I can put my commercial in there if I decide that I want to do that. And I just love how easy it is to use. It requires a very low bandwidth from my internet and as well as my guest internet. And it also provides all of the content that I have recorded into the back end of StreamYard, which allows me to access in other ways. I can then take that same exact podcast and I can download it, edit it. I can create clips within StreamYard as well. I can individually access the files, so I can have not only the file of us recording together where it's like we're side by side, all the branding is there. I've added her, I've added them, I've added myself. I have like share screen, all that stuff. Or I can have the individual tracks where it's literally just the recording of that person and myself or all the other people I interview, as well as their own files for me to do other things with as well. When I'm recording my content, the thing that's important for me is being able to have it look really good and have it easily accessible for myself and for my team as well, like in the event anything happens. And StreamYard does that for me. So definitely check out StreamYard. I have you down in the description below. When you're recording your content, just remember, again, we're looking for an audio first experience, so it needs to be very clear to hear you. Don't have distracting background noise like crying, air blowing, things that are going on. Like my space I've created to record, nothing else is happening. There's not flushing sounds, there's not kids crying, there's not dogs barking. It is an isolated, quiet space for me to do this so that I can create the best audio experience for you and for all the listeners of my podcast. Now that we've recorded our podcast, preferably the first 10, now we need to go do some things on the interwebs. We need to claim our online presence, okay? So definitely go to GoDaddy.com, wherever it is that you buy your .coms, and buy the name of your podcast in some way, shape, or form. Now, if you are using this podcast to support your business, my alternative to you is going to be to go add a tab onto your new website that's going to have your podcast on there, and still consider buying the .com and then have it just redirect to that spot on your website. But we want to have a home for our content because we're going to be creating our show notes. Our show notes are really helpful because it allows for the search optimization, allows people to navigate through the podcast really easy and know what to expect in the episode. Or maybe you and the guests mention links, or you've done something, you can put all the information in there as well. So you want to have your show notes, and it's going to be important for you to have a web place for it to happen, which is where the .com situation happened. Now, in pairing with this, you need to have a place to host your podcast. Even if you have a video podcast like you're going to put up on YouTube or whatever, you still have to have a separate podcast place for that to work, because currently when I'm recording this, when you upload a podcast to YouTube, like a video podcast, it lives in the YouTube space. It doesn't even go to YouTube Music. You have to set that up separately, okay? So you want to use a tool I highly recommend is using Spotify for podcasts. It's very easy to use, it's free, and it allows me to upload my video podcast there as well so people can watch the video on Spotify as well. Now, the reason you need a podcasting hosting place is because then you're going to get an RSS feed. It's going to be a special link that you can then go to all of the other podcasting places, Apple Music, YouTube, Pandora, Audible, everywhere else that has podcasts, and you're going to be able to put the RSS link in there by setting up an account with them, and then you're going to be able to have your podcast published and broadcast on more platforms. Not everyone listens to podcasts on Spotify or just Apple. There are a lot of other platforms that people are using out there, and you might as well amplify the reach of your podcast by being there as well, because all you have to do is set up an account on that platform to be there. So go claim your Spotify account so you get the RSS feed. You cannot set up your account with RSS feed to the other places without publishing a video first, which is why one of your first episodes should definitely be a trailer where people can kind of learn like what your podcast is going to be all about. And by having the episode 00 is what I call it, you can publish that and then use the RSS feed to go to all the other places to claim your spot on those platforms. Now we're gonna go into the whole design and publishing process. When we're going through and claiming our account within like the podcasting platform, you're gonna have some things that you're gonna have to do. You're gonna have to have a thumbnail, like what is the square, it is a square, like a 1080 by 1080 square thumbnail design for your podcast as a whole. As you can see on the screen, this is what the fun on YouTube looks like. This is what the women in video looks like. This is gonna be the thing that people are drawn to be attracted to what you have to offer. So make sure that find that balance between a simple POW statement. It balances design elements, things like that. If you're not great at design and not great at this kind of things, I definitely recommend checking out customthumbnails.com. They can help you create some really nice podcast art. It's going to make you look really good for launching your podcast. You're also then going to need a description. Your description should not be super long, just a simple paragraph outlining what it is that this podcast does, who it's for, and you can even support it with a secondary podcast where like this podcast is brought to you by, and that's when like the business part goes in there. If you do something that is legal or regulated, you can always add in it after that as well, any regulations and things that you have to meet compliance as well. You're then going to need to pick a category for your podcast. We have the Funded YouTuber under business podcast because there's not like a creator podcast section or a social media section. So by having that, you can also associate with an audience, like women of video is categorized under women and things like that. So it's a great way for you to figure out where your podcast is going to be associated, because that's like where your ranking and stuff is going to happen as well. Now, this one is going to be an interesting thing to consider, and it's having an introduction. Now, I have an introduction for both the Funded YouTuber podcast and for the Women of Video. And it's a full commercial. It's like, this is what this podcast is for. This is what it's about. This is what's brought to you by, which is an important part with podcasts, is having sponsors if that's what you're doing. And you have to kind of have the balance of like, is this necessary? Is this important to me? And how does my viewer reacting to it? If someone's going through a video experience, I highly recommend not having an introduction, because I can show you the data of watching that retention rate tank, because of an introduction is about, well, it's about you. And that's not what the podcast is about. It's about your listener and the problems that they're having. So if you want to have an introduction, that's for you to decide at this time. I think having audio experience is totally fine. Just don't let it be too long and wordy. So now that we've set up our podcast, we've recorded our episodes, we have all the things in place, now we need to actually make a podcast happen. And so now we want to go through the process, like, are we going to edit our podcast or not? Do we need to take things out? Do we need to put things together? Do we need to add in commercials? Figure out what editing looks like for you. You can just very simply with like whatever, like the studio, I have iMovie on my computer, and you can use that just fine for editing your podcast and putting it together. You can balance out your sound, do all the editing things. I am not an editor. Like, that's not my jam. If the idea of doing all of this sounds really daunting to you, our agency would love to help you navigate through creating that content so that it can be as the best presentation possible for you and with accomplishing what you want to accomplish. But ultimately, you need to have a finalized video or audio experience for people to do. Then you're going to upload it to whatever platform it is that you want it to go to. Now, within this episode, you have some different options. One, you're going to need a title, and you're going to need a description. Your title, it should be something very catchy and relevant. I highly recommend not doing the episode numbers. I also recommend like not leading with like the name of a guest. I think that should be part of the title, not like the whole title. Really make sure it's catching and like giving people that idea of like what are they going to get from this episode, and attract it that way. You also can upload an individualized thumbnail for each episode. I do this for my episodes where I'm interviewing people. I put the picture of them as part of the thumbnail. That way that there's that association and people are interested in them. And it really helps with like that retention and that interest as well. Now, when you're doing your description, I want you to consider thinking your description of your episode as show notes. Your show notes are going to be a synopsis of like what's going to happen. You can have the bio for your guest or you in there. And then you're going to have your timestamp. So at what time do these different things happen on the episode? So we want to make sure that we think through how that would look, put those timestamps in and why they're there. Another advantage of having those show notes with the timestamps is it adds an extra search engine optimization to it, where people can like find an answer to a question that they have that comes from that show note. So like maybe if you're talking about how to make money as a YouTuber, a specific question that can get answered is like how to make money with affiliate marketing, right? And so you can tie that in. So really think through how your description, your show notes are going to add a lot of extra value to the person that is listening so that someone wants to go visit there. Because what we're trying to do is relocate them to your website, your business website, where they can get more information about you and the services that you offer. So really dig into that as best as you can. Now, you can schedule it out through the platform and then you can publish it whenever it's ready to go live. I encourage you to pick a time and day every single week, or maybe if like you're doing a bi-monthly podcast, it's going to come out so that people know when to expect it and you have a deadline in place to make sure that that happens. Now, it's not done yet. We're not done just because we've launched the podcast. I'm going to highly encourage you to promote your podcast to amplify its chances for success. So definitely create other social content pieces that are going to support it. Send it to your email list. Create some vertical videos from Reels that you can post on social media to drive traffic to your episode. Create static images that you can share on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn with the link where people can go listen and watch and learn more from your episode. Those first 10 to 15 episodes are really important for your podcast so that you can have the best chance for success and the best chance for traction. So really dig into that promotion of your podcast as well to be successful. Now, if you want to watch the video where I went over a lot about how podcasting is new blogging, please watch that right here. It's going to navigate you through that very clearly. And if you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments below.